Mark.
Thank you, Andy. Welcome everybody. We're numbers are still coming in, but we're going to make a prompt start, shall we say? In front of you, you've got Duncan and Dave, and this evening is all about jet flying with the JMA. It's an introduction. We're going to be talking, hopefully, about some basic to intermediate. Am I right to suggest that?
Yes, but we're talking about the association and what it tries to do for the hobby. But yes, we'll touch on that sort of stuff.
Fantastic. So look forward to getting all your questions and questions later, and we'll get some answers off the guys. And hand over to you both. Thank you both.
Thanks, Mark. Andy, are you okay to run the presentation for us? Oh, Andy's muted.
Is he?
Andy, can you hear me? Oh,
he's talking, but
yeah, he's talking. We can't hear you.
Sorry, now you can. Yeah,
that's it.
Right.
Thanks.
Can you see that now?
Blank screen.
I'll be there in a moment. Hopefully, he says.
Needs winding up faster.
200 fingers crossed, please.
I am sharing from this end.
Mine just says has started screen sharing.
How's that? Is it there?
Yeah.
Hey.
Sorry about that minor delay, chaps.
That's okay. Okay, Dave. Well, you okay for the first bit?
Yep. So good evening, everyone. It's a bit weird not seeing people, but I can just see my learned colleagues. So obviously, Jet Models Association is what we're here to talk about tonight. The association, some of you will know, started back in the 90s when model jet turbine activity really started in the UK. The Jet Models Association is the BMFA specialist body as far as jet operations in the UK. Our main remit is to run jet meetings and get-togethers for like-minded jet modelers, but we also act as an advice bureau for the BMFA. I know over the years I've been chairman that we've had situations where clubs have struggled to get permission maybe from landowners to operate their jets, and we've tried to help out where we can with experience and talking about situations that we're aware and where landowners work with jet modelers, that sort of thing. We're here to help anybody with a jet turbine powered model. Really and truly, we were always a thrust producing, so jet engines sending out hot gases to make things fly. Recently, there's a move within the association to include turboprops. We've never got involved with helicopters, but aeroplanes powered by jet engines is basically the thing. And we can be here. We have a website that Duncan's going to talk about shortly where we've updated things. The old website was a bit out of date and stale, but we still, and even in the last week, we had questions from a modeler that was having problems with a new jet model and was looking for advice. And obviously within the JMA, we have a massive experience base. So there's a lot of guys to call on and to help. So that's our main thing. We're lucky to have access to places like the BMFA National Centre. It still amazes me that I meet people now and you talk about it and say I've never visited. And I tell them to because I think it's an amazing facility and we're very lucky to be able to operate there with jets. So we manage 3 meetings a year, at the centre. And then over the years, we've had access to lots of airfields, World War II type bases, where the JMA actually pay for the use of the airfield. It's very rare that we get free access. If anyone's got a World War II airfield tucked under their arm that we don't know about and they want to let us use it, then we'd be very, very happy to come and join you. But that's the main thing the JMA is for. So I don't know whether people seeing this as it comes up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Duncan's going to talk a bit about the new website, which is has it gone live today, Duncan?
Yes, you went live this afternoon, Dave. Yep.
Yeah, and we've had people linking into that. So as I said, it's been a long time coming, and we'll have the various social medias connected up to that, which will make communication that much better for all the jet modelers. But I mean, as an association, we're not about the top level. I mean, that's where we end up, because I think a lot of people want to get to the ultimate scale models. Obviously, we've had Jet World Masters, where there's a jet competition that's run around the world in various different countries, and we've had people win that. And for many years, we did compete as a team. It's a very difficult situation because it used to be a 2-week-long competition for maybe 3 flights. So unless you wanted a holiday in the particular country that it's been held in, one of the committee members of the JMA has been running a flying only, just a sport scale competition, which we've actually run at Buckminster at the BMFA Centre. And that's been popular with the people because there's no pressure of scale judging the aeroplane. It's just the flying side of things. And really, it's more about giving people experience of sitting in front of judges. We welcome people with all levels of jet modelling and all sorts of airframes. Duncan?
Yeah, sorry. Next slide, Andy. Do you want to? Actually, Dave, we've got a series of slides that Andy will change for us that really have outlined what you've been talking about.
Okay.
Tell me to.
Andy, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
So next slide, please. Sorry.
Yep.
So these are the things really that the slides that were for Dave to talk over. So what we're here for is really venues and events, sourcing venues, support and advice to members, and help for those who are new to turbine flying in a variety of ways, including forums and social media groups. Next slide. But I'm repeating here a lot of the things that Dave's already said.
So this is a list of what's due to come this year. As I said, we normally in non-COVID times, and obviously the last 18 months or so has been very difficult for the association and the hobby in general. But we normally have 3 events in Buckminster, normally one in March, where we would hope to hold our AGM, one in June, which will be coming up shortly, and one in September. We were lucky enough to find an airfield, Deanthorpe, that's on the screen. Spelled incorrectly, but never mind, everyone does that. It's an old World War II airfield that the operator of the airfield is unbelievably compliant and helpful and friendly and supportive. And that's a rare commodity for us with jet models, because we've found airfields that we thought might be suitable for jet operations and contacted the landowner, and they just instantly, without talking to us, say, no, not interested at all. Whereas the guys from Deanthorpe were the most can-do people I've ever talked to. And they thought it was great. And even now they're in a situation where they say that their full-size guys love coming along and watching jets operate because they're fascinated by them. Sculthorpe is way up in Norfolk, and it's an amazing flying site that a lot of people wouldn't know about. They think it's a horrendous long drive, but it's not as far as you think. But it's a huge, huge airfield. I remember one of the first times we were going there, Paul Bardot from Pylon Racing said that he was going to be on the airfield the same weekend. And I was horrified, thinking that, we were going to have overfly problems. And it wasn't until very late in the day, when this stream of cars came driving around the Perry track, that I realized that they'd been on the airfield all day, and we weren't even aware that they were operating. It's such a large airfield. It's colossal. And then Elvington, there's 2 meetings. It's not actually a JMA event. It's run by the Elvington Model Flyers, but the JMA support it. We help financially with operating on the airfield, and that's an incredible flying site. We've just come back from there this weekend. If I have a slight rosy tinge, it's because I didn't wear enough sun cream, probably for the amount of sunshine we had. In God's own country, I think the Yorkshire people call it. But anyway, so we normally have 9 to 11 meetings per year, the JMA.
Next slide, Andy, please.
Yep.
Cool.
So I think I touched on it earlier. We're here to help and support anyone. And the website had a very popular for sale. I know these days the BMFA for sale page does quite well out of jet stuff as well, because there's an overlap. But we've always had a sort of throughput of stuff being sold, used and secondhand stuff, and that will be on the new website as well.
Okay, next slide, Andy.
So the annual scale competition, as I said, is held at Buckminster, normally at our September meeting. We try and have it on the Friday so that it doesn't impact. We do 3 days at Buckminster at each of the 3 meetings. And we've had the event on the Friday so that it doesn't impact the main flying on the Saturday and Sunday. We were very lucky that Dave Tappin, who's an international judge from the IJMC, although retired now, but he ran it for us, and even had a friend, Bert, from Holland, come over as a judge. He's also an IJMC judge, to allow guys to fly in front of international judges. But it's a very relaxed, very easygoing, and the only criteria really is your aeroplane is scale somewhere near. And we operate it just to give people the chance to experience flying in front of judges.
Okay, next slide, Andy. Oh yeah, important stuff.
Yeah, so again, we've been quite remiss this year as far as organising all of these things. Part of it is the delay in getting this new website out. We kept thinking that it was going to be live and we could announce things. But on the Saturday at Buckminster, we will finally have an AGM that we missed in 2019 and sort out some of the things that needed to be changed and updated from what was voted in 2019. A lot of the committee have decided to stand down due to various different reasons. As I said earlier, I've been chairman for 15 years now, and I was bullied into it 15 years ago by a guy called Tom Wilkinson, who was an original GTBA member. And I've sort of stuck here this long, but I think it's time that someone else takes it on and understands what it's actually like and how it impacts other things in your life. So yes, the AGM will be 1 p.m. At Buckminster on Saturday the 12th.
Cool. Andy, next slide. I think we're on to the, I've just got a couple of slides about the website. So as Dave's mentioned, we managed to go live this afternoon with the new website. And as I hope many of you will appreciate, it's now hosted by the BMFA for several good reasons, not the least of which is they host it for free for specialist bodies, which is excellent. That's an advantage of being part of the national body or specialist body of the national body. But more importantly, actually, is the fact that we have excellent expert backup and assistance in terms of setting up the website and helping maintain it. And I have to, give credit and thanks to Andy for helping me set up what you will see very shortly if you already haven't had a look at it this afternoon. It has a new domain name, obviously, because BMFA are hosting it, and probably the most important thing that folks need to do is make sure that, because that domain name will generate automated emails, that they don't go to your spam or junk folders. So it's a question of setting the parameters on whatever email system you have to make sure that the emails come to your inbox rather than spam or junk. The other advantage is it's a kind of a common format and theme between all the various specialist bodies, although obviously the content is hugely different. Most important from my point of view as membership secretary is there's now an automated online membership system with credit card and PayPal options for members to pay. So no more sticking a check in the post, which surely went out with the dinosaurs. So now we can do it nice and easily through the BMFA system. Okay, next slide, please, Andy. The website has all the usual features that you'd expect to see on a website. So it has a gallery, it has an events calendar, it has a news feed, it has contacts for the committee and a forum, which is interestingly the same forum that we operated on the old website. And the last two things I've got to sort out with Andy and some others are the link to and the Facebook group, the JMA Facebook group, which I need to enable all the access for members. There's a problem there. And also the forum needs to be linked to the new domain. So there's a little bit of work left to do, but it is now live, and all the other functionality is up there and working. The other great thing, as well as having the online membership system, is that we can set up automatic email notifications to members and subscribers. So those of you that, and I know quite a few of you have done it already. I think there's more than a couple of dozen people have already subscribed to the newsfeed. So whenever we post anything new on the website, you'll get an automatic email notification that something new has been posted.
Duncan, I can bring up a little poll now.
Perfect. Okay.
So if anybody would like adding to the mailing list for the JMA website, just click yes on that poll. Hopefully you can see. If you don't, put no if you don't. If you will only get added if you actually physically click yes. So we'll leave that running for a minute or two, so you can all decide on that. And I'll see if I can share the website for you.
Yeah, that'll be lovely, Andy. Thanks.
Is it there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If you don't click yes this time and you want to be added later on, you can do it by clicking the subscribe to receive news alerts on the actual website. And then if you go to events, it will list them when they've been added.
Yeah, there should be a few in there now.
Yeah, there's a few there, so you can click on an event to get all the details. And so they'll put prices and everything you need to know can be added to that. Okay. If you want access to the forum, click on forum, and there's a contact page as well. So if you want to drop an email to either the chairman, event secretary, or membership secretary, you can do it all through there. And then you've got the join us page if you haven't joined up yet and you're wanting to. It's an online form. Just complete the online form, select your payment method. Credit card is going to be added in the next few days to that. But if you're paying by PayPal or direct bank transfer, all the information you need is presented on the screen when you submit the form, and you get it by an email as well. Okay.
I should just say that the fee that's up there at the moment is the current fee until, of course, we set the new annual membership fees at the AGM, hopefully in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the website. So I'll end that poll now as well. So that's 84. I won't add into your mailing list. So you'll be added later on. Okay.
Okay. Thanks very much.
No worries.
I think now we're on to questions.
You pretty much are, yeah. There you go.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a couple of early questions. David Oakley, most jets are constructed from glass fibre or fiberglass. Is this for structural reasons?
No. So in the early days of jets, a guy called Alan Kardash developed the Boomerang series that Ali Majinski Jr. used to campaign and was still sold until very recently, now owned by Ripmax. The main reason is that I guess jet models, they tend to be higher value because of the propulsion system, and the glass fiber ones last longer if you don't have an accident. They don't get dinked as easily, they don't deteriorate. The kerosene, the jet fuel that we use, isn't particularly friendly to film covering. But no, generally it's just that they last longer. Wooden airframes can be made just as strong if they're designed correctly. But no, I would say probably flying in England, although the majority, because scale aeroplanes tend to be composite. There was a guy in my local club that last year, right at the beginning of the lockdown, said, I really want an F4 Phantom, but I can't justify the cost of one of the glass ones. Do you think I could scratch build one myself? And I thought he was crazy, but said, yes, anything's possible. And he bought a plastic kit, started from there. I test flew it about 2 months ago. If you look at it from 6 feet away, it looks like it's fully molded. Obviously, it was a lot of work, but it saved him a fortune. So, no, they don't have to be composite for the strength.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dave. Peter Brett, he's got a question here. An issue with exhaust gases. Does the JMA have a view on this? So it's got two questions.
Is it the toxicity of the exhaust gas or the heat or?
He was talking about on previous one. I have heard that normal turbine oil contains things that aren't good for you when breathed in after passing through the model jet turbine, which produces a lot of exhaust gases. So it's
correct. Okay, so model jet turbines generally have always been run on full size turbine oil, which there's various different manufacturers. But of course, in a full size jet engine, they're not burnt. It's a dry sump type lubrication in the jet engine. Whereas we actually mix it with the fuel like a two-stroke and we burn it through. And there are reports to say that the normal can type quarts of turbine oil are potentially carcinogenic when burnt. There's several companies now that have introduced turbine oils that aren't toxic. If people subscribe to RCJI magazine, Radio Controlled Jet International, there's a big article in the very latest issue. Deluxe Materials, English company, they've spent a long time developing an oil that is safe to burn. So yes, he is right. I've never heard of any definite situation where someone's caused, and obviously I've been around turbine oil for 20 odd years now and I've had no ill effects, but there's a potential there, but there's now an alternative.
Okay. Two people asking the same or very similar question here, Adrian Hayward and Chris Bradbury, who we know very well from Chris. Is there a good starter jet and how easy are they to set up and operate? I think this is going to be a good topic for you.
That's a difficult question. So for a long time, people did start with boomerangs. Ripmax then introduced a jet called an Excalibur. They tend to be twin boom aircraft because you don't have the complication of a tailpipe. The real reason the twin boom became popular is that access to the turbine was very good. And like I said, by not having the tailpipe where the turbine was potentially buried in a duct where you couldn't see it, was more difficult for people learning to operate them. The problems being that, I said earlier, Ripmax bought the boomerang range and the Excalibur. They were manufactured in China like a lot of ARTFs are. And I'm sure the membership and the people that are reading now, they won't be aware of the shipping problems that's come about because of COVID. And I explained to people that container ships, there are a certain number of cubes on each ship to ship stuff from China to England or Europe. And they're all full. They're full of PPE, and they're full of needles and wipes and alcohols and masks. And shipping costs for a container have gone up by the factor of 5, almost exactly, massively. And therefore, for our models, it would affect them. So at the moment, there's an interruption in the supply of those kits. There'll be a lot of secondhand ones or used ones, or maybe even brand new kits tucked away in wardrobes. But there isn't an immediate airframe that I can come up with to say yes, other than maybe finding a secondhand one. But generally, something with a lower wing loading and not scale is a better way of starting. I mean, the best thing to do is for the guys to contact the JMA, and we'll help them as best we can. One of the first questions I generally ask is the flying site, i.e. whether it's tarmac, whether it's grass, and the length of the strip they're operating from.
Lewis asks this of the JMA, what's the current status of existing members and renewals? Do we now renew through the site, or is 2020 covered?
Right. Shall I take that one, Dave?
Yep, go on then.
If you were very simple, if you were a member in 2019 or you joined in 2020 or 2021, you're still a member until we hold the AGM, hopefully on the 12th. That's the plan. Then we will set the membership fees for the coming year, and we will go from there and members would need to reapply and rejoin. So if you were a member 2019 or you joined in 2020 or 2021, then you are still a member. If you want to join, we'll quite happily accept your membership. We just charge a nominal fee of £12.50 to process your membership, and then we'll reassess that once we've held the AGM.
I wouldn't do it now with only 2 weeks to go.
No, exactly. Yeah.
What I'll try and do, group some of these questions. Again, about getting started. Can you talk through the steps of getting started? Turbines for beginners, jet pilot. What are the prerequisite skills required, and what starter models would you recommend? Well, obviously you've covered the latter part, but how would you get started? I think it's a sensible question.
I mean, the best way of starting is to have someone near you or within your club that's already operating a turbine. But obviously, the association is here to help guys like that. For flying at a JMA event, the pilot has to have a B certificate, and we don't have any option for A certificate pilots that might be perfectly capable as far as their flying skills, but we expect them to have done a B certificate so that they can prove they understand the safety side of things. And obviously, here we are in 2021, a lot has changed, Article 16. So it's changed things even more as far as that requirement. But the main requirement generally is flying site. Some people just don't have a flying site that's suitable. They need to consider people around them. So I fly at a grass field where we operate jets nearly all the year round, but there's crops around us. And you have to be sensible and understand that once the crop's brown, flying a jet turbine with a Bunsen burner in the back of it is not a good idea. And therefore we stop jet flying for a month and a half while the crop's ripe. And that needs to be thought of as well. But having some experience certainly makes it far less painful. That's not to say you couldn't go alone, because there's a lot of guys that do have the skills. I get people talk to me about aircraft they can buy to practice before they buy a jet. And they talk about EDF, and it can be a reasonable way of going. But the Germans call them foam waffles, and they mean lightweight, low wing loading aircraft, which doesn't teach you anything. But there are a few of the larger EDF jets now with the multi-blade fan, so they're not too noisy, that will carry a 5,000 milliampere hour 6S pack. They're a reasonable way of going, because I would say jet flying is all about energy management rather than piloting skill.
And it also, those EDFs have the advantage, it gets people used to operating in flaps and retracting undercarriage if they've not experienced those on their conventional models. So.
Yeah, I mean, we get people that come from heavily reloaded warbirds that have never flown jet propulsion EDF. Someone that flies a P-47 or something like that will be used to retracts, will be used to flaps, and to a degree used to energy management. But it comes back to managing the energy.
Thank you. Right. Mike Hesketh and Adrian Hazeldine both asking, is the JMA able to put newbies in touch with a local mentor or something like that? Is there a mentoring scheme you have in place, or?
No, but obviously we have a good knowledge of where our membership are based. So absolutely would be willing to do that. So yeah, contact.
I'm making a note, Dave. I'll put that in the book.
On the
mentoring scheme like that.
For Mike Hesketh, Andy Ellison has said that he could perhaps take over from Kevin for a short while. So if you get in touch with Kevin, he'll pass you on contact details for Andy Ellison.
Brilliant. No, that's really good. I'm just scanning through these. You've got dozens of questions coming in, so forgive me if there's a little bit of silence here. Andy can always. One of the questions came up there. I mean, what's the sort of cost for getting started? It's a question I wanted to ask actually, because I have no idea what.
It's a really difficult one. So buying used equipment, probably realistically from a couple of grand, £2,000. I mean, it really depends. You get people, and I get people that contact me at the business that have bought stuff on eBay that aren't fit to be operated. There was a company called Jet Joe in China that were making Ren rip-off copies, and some ran okay and some exploded. But probably if you're buying used, if you budget £2,000, and if you're buying new, probably double that. It doesn't have to be that expensive. And again, like the guy with the Phantom, if you're someone with good building skills, you could build your own aircraft and save a fortune. The composite aeroplanes do tend to be more expensive. But we recommend, guys, and that's why we like it when people come to JMA events, we get a chance of looking at the airframe, better quality servos, and it's worth spending in that sort of airframe because it will reward you in the way it responds. If it's a crisper servo, jets tend to fly with sharper control inputs, and you'll feel the benefit.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Trevor Adams asks, hi, new to jets, wondering on redundancy systems for jets and your thoughts on gyros.
So gyros aren't strictly necessary. And when they first came out, a lot of people sneered at people that used gyros. And the way I described it is particularly for a scale aeroplane, people will spend hundreds, thousands of hours making the aircraft look more scale by detailing. But actually, a gyro will make it look more like the full-size thing when it flies, because it doesn't jig around in the wind like ungyroed aircraft do. So it comes down to the design. Redundancy, yes, we recommend people run dual battery systems, because fundamentally you can have the best radio equipment and the best servos and the best extension leads, but if the power to them fails, you will crash. And there's a lot of good dual battery systems on the market. A lot of the jets, if someone comes to the JMA meetings and has a look, they'll find 2 receivers. Now, you can have an argument that 2 of something doesn't necessarily make it, safer, but in jets where there's a lot of metal work that can screen and isolate the aerials from the TX signal, having 2 receivers allows you to spread it out around the airfield, and you've got a much better chance that the signal is going to get picked up. So dual receivers, the spectrum users where they have satellites, they do the leads that allow you to place the satellites around the airframe. That can be a good way of going. But yes, I would recommend dual batteries and dual receivers. And at the end of the day, you're protecting your own investment as well as the safety aspect.
Andrew Ellison's pointing, I think, a question at you here, Duncan. Turboprop, sorry, no, missed that one. Sorry, BMFA Jet C cert seems a bit soft compared to aerobatic C cert, now that one has choices of 7 from 20 instead of 7 from 10.
Really? Well, interestingly, the turbine C was developed in consultation with the turbine community, but the maneuvers are designed, they may look simple in terms of aerobatics, because a lot of turbine models aren't necessarily out and out aerobatic models. But the fundamental thing is the requirements in the C test are actually a fair few of the maneuvers that might look simple are actually quite demanding in terms of operating a turbine model. And as Dave has said, quite a lot of it is about energy management. So, a dirty pass with a turbine and a go around or an overshoot is not necessarily a trivial thing. It might be for your, foamy Spitfire or whatever, but actually for a turbine model where you've got drag to manage, and you've got the slight lag in the turbine that we have, and you've got the weight of the model, the mass of the model rather, to accelerate. So what can look like a simple maneuver actually isn't. And I think we've done some quite subtle things in the turbine C, where the candidate is allowed to nominate certain maneuvers and set the sequence. And what an examiner will be looking for example, is that the candidate chooses the maneuvers that are appropriate for the early part of the flight, where the model will be fat and heavy with fuel, compared with the end of the flight where the model will be so much lighter, probably at least a kilo or 2. And so if you've got someone who's choosing to do a loop, say right at the beginning of the schedule, that's not as sensible as doing something like that towards the end. So there's a lot more to it than just the maneuvers, and also the maneuvers may look simple, but actually they can be quite demanding for a turbine. So that would be my response to that question.
Brilliant, thank you. Greg Fitzpatrick, he says hi to everybody. Slightly disappointed that turbine helicopters are not part of the coverage. Is there any prospect of helicopters coming into the JMA fold?
It's unlikely,
but who can say? If the membership suddenly decided that they wanted helicopters, but I think it's they're a small community within a small community. If that doesn't sound harsh, so.
We can certainly still advise, help, and in fact, I had a phone call tonight from a guy that supported his first turbine helicopter as a used one. But as far as our events, mixing rotary wing with fixed wing is very, very difficult. And access to these airfields is, as I said, difficult again. The numbers that turn up means that there's a queue to fly quite often, and having a slow moving target, I would describe it, as a helicopter flying around would not be a good idea with faster sports jets. So, it's possible at some of the sites that we could operate turbine helicopters, but no, at the moment, Jet Models Association is just fixed wing.
Andy also put not a dissimilar question in here, but turboprops allowed at JMA events or not? Please clarify for the masses.
Well,
Oh, we knew this one was going to come up, Dave. didn't we?
there was a vote in 2019 to include them. Unfortunately, we didn't get to do an AGM in 2020, but the general consensus seemed to be that they wanted to include them, even though I didn't agree. So we'll vote on that at the AGM on the 12th of June, and it's likely to be carried.
Neil White, do the JMA have training sessions?
No, but at meetings it does happen. The membership do give up their time. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a hobby that everyone should be enjoying. And I'm warmed by the fact that people give an enormous amount of time at meetings when they go to fly their own jets. But if a guy turns up, someone will always help them. And particularly with first runs, I encourage people to bring a jet model along, even if it's not 100% flight ready. If the turbine's ready to run, bring it to Buckminster and we can find time to help people and show, because it's quite a daunting experience the first time you run it. I always tell, Duncan was involved with the Hobby Jets turbine years and years ago, 20 odd years ago. And myself and my best friend, we bought one and started it in my old office car park. And we were scared senseless because everything happened. And at the time, the turbines now are very automatic. They're very plug and play. But at that time, the Hobby Jet turbine had a separate oil feed, which you had to turn on and off. It needed an air blower wand to spin it over. It needed a glow plug putting on. It needed gas administering. So it took two of us several minutes of running around like a hot tin roof. And then this thing took off. It's quite daunting. So coming along to the JMA meetings and getting people to help you, absolutely. We're there to help.
Yeah, and I think the important point, Dave, is you don't have to be a B certificate member to come along to a meeting and see what goes on, all the rest of that. It's only for flying. So,
yeah.
So if you're at an early stage and you want to come and see what sort of models people are flying and chat to everybody, you're more than welcome to come.
And join as a non-flyer. I mean, the JMA in history, we have a lot of members even now that are only A certificate pilots, and some of them come to every meeting. Our photographer, Alistair Powers, I know he's on here somewhere. He's done a lot of articles for the BMFA News. He's an A certificate holder, but enjoys the meetings, enjoys coming along, and it's a huge help to have people like that at the meeting. So yeah, no, absolutely become a member and aspire to get a B certificate.
Brilliant. A couple of safety questions here. Chris Bradbury, is RC jet fuel dangerous as in mega flammable, or is it safe? I've heard people say it's more dangerous than petrol and others claim it isn't. Are there any insurance implications for storing it at home? And also, just while I'm there, I've got another one here. Greg Fitzpatrick, hi, can you comment on the safety of onboard propane cylinders? I've heard they can be unsafe.
So in America, they outlawed onboard propane. So this is where a turbine, the pre-warming before the liquid fuel goes in was done by gas. There's very little in the way of turbines sold that way these days, but obviously there could be some on the used market. And what it did was it used a propane butane mix to pre-warm the chamber before the electric fuel was squirted in. And the Americans decided that there was more chance of a fire in the event of a crash from the gas cylinder rupturing or the piping more likely coming off and spraying the gas into the flame or hot part of the engine. You could sit down and analyze 10 crashes and you would have 10 different outcomes. And I've seen crashes with gas on board with no fire, and I've seen others that look quite innocent and not too bad a crash that have, and everything else in between. But as far as the fuel itself, to answer that question, I'd say no. Petrol is much more dangerous because once it's heated, it's the fumes that will ignite. If you get yourself a tray of kerosene and chuck a match into it, generally it goes out. Can't remember what they call that, but it's not that flammable. As far as storing it home, insurance, you would need to talk to your insurance company, but almost certainly they would freak. And I have members that turn up at our jet meetings boasting about how many litres of kerosene they have packed in their car for a weekend flying. And again, I've commented to some of them that they need to talk to their insurance company, at least think about it, because in the event of an incident, most jet modelers aren't driving around with the various different stickers on the back of their vehicle saying that there's flammable liquid on board. So it's something worth considering.
Brilliant, Dave. Similar line, but I'm not quite sure about this. Jake Beer, paraffin or 28-second heating oil?
Same stuff. So basically, Jet A1, 28-second heating oil, kerosene, paraffin, it's basically the same stuff. Jet A1, they just put a smell in it so that the idiots with their prop aeroplanes at the airport don't fill it up with jet fuel, take off and find their internal combustion engine doesn't work anymore. And then they're in a very heavy glider and then they crash. I don't like the full-size fuels because generally it needs more filtering. So I use a very expensive paraffin that you can buy from all of the DIY, home-based B&Q and others. And it's very, very clean, doesn't need a lot of filtering. But as far as the way your engine runs, it's pretty much the same. But some of the cheaper paraffins, 28-second heating oil, might have more carbon buildup. And you need to think about that because your turbine will need servicing earlier. But definitely all of the fuels should be, there's something called Mr. Funnel. And it's an amazing funnel that's so fine that water droplets won't go through it. So if you tip kerosene through it, it will take all the water out and other debris and particles. Obviously, the bearings on our turbines, some of the little micro turbines are running 250,000 RPM, 250,000 RPM, and they don't like grit.
Talking about turbines, Nathan O'Dwyer, I see that Swin turbines have now been selling in the UK. Are they any good? Also, please, can I ask, auto restart, good thing or bad?
So the Swin turbines, yes, they've recently come in. I think there's a guy called Dave Torb, HSD or HDS Jets. I think it's his company that's handling them. Not seen enough of them to know. I did talk to the company in Germany a few years ago about testing some of their products. Anyone can make anything that will run for a short period of time, including the GTBA with their sheds. But it's the long-term reliability that's the interesting one. So the answer is too early to know. Sorry, what was the other question?
Well, you would ask that. Sorry, about auto restart.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, I think it off the page.
I think a very bad thing. RCJI again's covered this. It's one of those things that if you look at a lot of the reports that are done in the jet magazines, the actual restart and stabilization time varies from turbine to turbine. And generally speaking, even the fastest ones are more than 10 seconds. And if you imagine a heavily loaded jet, by the time you've realized that it's flamed out, it goes back to the energy management, it's losing energy. If you're then thinking about going through a restart process or allowing it to, you might be distracted from the core thing of all aviation, which is to fly the aeroplane. And I've said that basically the restart will probably happen just about as it hits the ground and the fuel pump's ramping up with the hot engine and a fire. So we did touch on it in the JMA about whether we would outlaw them or outlaw the setup. All the electronics allow you to switch it off. And I think I wrote an article in RCJI and said that I thought it was a bad thing. And my understanding is that now all the manufacturers that offer it, it comes inhibited and you have to activate it. And then, so if you had a glider, it would be good and no reason why not. And if you have a very lightly loaded jet aeroplane for whatever reason, then it may well save things. But it's a bit like how you have your fail-safe, whether we stop the turbine or go to idle. My own feeling is idle is safer because a heavy aircraft with no engine, if there's a chance of getting it back, is safer. But personally, no, I wouldn't use it.
Eugene Anker asks, have you seen the new HSD foamy jets and what do you think of them?
Yes, so at Elvington Jet Meeting where I was this weekend, getting my lovely red face, the importer was there with the whole range of them. And in fact, he came to our first Dean Thorpe meeting as well. They seem to fly okay. They seem to operate okay. I don't think I'm the right person to particularly say. It's definitely an easy, relatively inexpensive way of getting into jet flying. I'm interested to see what the long-term effect is on the foam with the kerosene, because I think they're going to become a bit mushy after a while. But certainly the quality seems to be okay. I've seen them flown relatively hard to prove that they're not just falling apart. They're very popular in the US and some of the other countries. So yeah. I mean, talk to the importers, a guy called Dave Torb. He's a very straight guy. contact him, talk to him, and he could steer you through it.
Brilliant. Neil White, it must be picking up on an earlier question of yours regarding the cost of things. HSD RTF Jetta can be as little as 2,800 brand new, ready to fly.
But that's without radio, without a fuel station, without all the other. Anyway, yep.
Nathan O'Dwyer, what is your views on the Pilot RC Viper jet, 2 meters?
Yep, seems to be a fairly good airframe. It's a little heavier as far as wing loading than maybe some of the other brands. Jet Legend Faber, I think, made one. But yes, it seems to be a reasonable jet. And the thing that I always say with these aircraft when they first come on the market is if we're seeing them not fall apart in the air, then they're good because structurally they're safe. Pilot RC have got a fairly good name these days. So yes, it's a reasonable aeroplane.
Good. John Leach, how heavy are the jets you have shown in the pictures?
I don't know what pictures.
You come back on that one if you want, Duncan.
model turbines, probably the little P20 powered aircraft like the original Habu that was converted from EDF to turbine. And I have a little Airwell Cougar from about 7 pounds in weight. And I think the LMA chairman's Vulcan is 150 kilos or pounds.
It's just under 150 kilograms, I think, isn't it?
145 kilos. So we've got the whole spectrum. So again, with jets, it's more wing loading rather than the overall weight.
Stuart Willis, what's the life of a turbine, or is it dependent on the make?
I'm sure that has an influence, but the way you look after it and some luck. I tell stories of, I had a customer in Wales who was a sheep farmer, owned his own land, had his own takeoff landing strip, bought a turbine from me, and this is way back in 2001. And after sort of year, 18 months, not particularly long time, he contacted me and asked about servicing. And I said, well, the manufacturers generally recommend 25 hours. Many of them then talk about 50 hours. And the reason they do is, believe it or not, a lot of universities buy turbines for running in labs. And obviously it's much cleaner, much less grit around, and they'll run for 50 hours. So we would say between 25 and 50. But anyway, this Welsh guy said, how would I know how many hours my turbines had? And I said, plug in your ground support unit and read it off. He said, what's a ground support unit? I said, it was the thing he used to set it up. He said, oh, that's in a box somewhere. And my first thought was, if he hadn't needed to use it in 18 months, he was obviously getting on okay. He rang me a couple of days later and said 154 hours and 20 minutes. And I was like, no, 15 hours, 40 minutes. He went, no, it says 154 hours. I said, look, it's not possible to run 154 hours. And he said, yep. So he sent me a photograph of the GSU, which said 154 hours. So I contacted JetCat and they said, can we have the engine? We sent it back basically for a service, and they asked whether they could keep it and give him a brand new turbine because they were amazed that it had run for 154 hours without a service. So if you don't give them trauma, if you don't have hot flamey starts, and this was a gas start turbine, so that's even more amazing. They're very reliable. But the general first recommended service check is at 25 hours. Brand wise, it's difficult again because they can be temperamental beasts in that you can get the best brand in the world and they can go wrong, and you can get the very worst with a reputation that runs totally reliably.
Makes sense. Chris Bradbury asks again, beyond the jet itself, what else would we have to fly them? Is there a list of recommended extras such as fire extinguisher? Which type is the best? What is the best kit bag, etc., etc.?
Okay, so absolutely, fire extinguisher is number one on the list. CO2 fire extinguisher, powder will just corrode your engine and electronics and ruin everything. So it must be a CO2 extinguisher or gas one. There are expensive fuel stations sold for pumping fuel in. There's nothing to stop you using a hand pump if you like whistling your wrist around for that long. But some of our jets are carrying 6 litres of fuel, and that's a lot of hand pumping. The reason that the jet fuel stations are generally quite expensive is because they use a very special pump, which is anti-spark. So the fumes that we talked about earlier, the the gases that could ignite are suppressed. And generally they're very good quality. My own fuel station is 16 years old now and is still running and would have pumped thousands of litres. But the absolute minimum, a fire extinguisher, and a way of getting fuel in your tank. But other than that, it's the sort of tools that you would have in your normal model box.
Brilliant. Thank you. Nathan O'Dwyer, firefighting media for safety. What does the JMA recommend? Similar, you've probably just covered that, but it's...
Yes, but it comes down to flying sites. So if you fly with grass or crops around, I recommend that you have some water, like 25 litre drums of it, because a CO2 fire extinguisher on a corn or a grass field is just a chocolate teapot. So beaters are worth having. And AFF fire extinguishers, the acro foaming one that expands. So clubs, if they're operating a lot of jets, Phoenix, where we fly locally, they have other firefighting means within the club hut to deal with fires. Luckily, they're very rare these days. But yes, you should think about it at least.
This one tickled me a little bit here. Matthew Osborne. Hi, I'm interested in control system programming. Is there a recommended platform for programming? I need to learn to fly first also. So is that bit that I don't know about the programming. Don't know whether you can help on that at all.
I need to expand on exactly what he's asking. I mean, programming the radio, depending on the system that he chooses. But as far as actual programming turbine electronics, there isn't much. There's things you can change, but not programming it as such.
If you'd like to come back to us on that one, Matthew, and expand on that, that would be brilliant. Thank you. Right. Adrian Hazeldine, I should say, sorry, apologies. In the absence of the twin boom starter jets, are there any lightly loaded scale jets that would make a good first jet model?
So we generally say that if you go for a swept wing jet, the stall when it finally comes, the wing drop tends to be more sudden. So Vampires, obviously, is another twin boom, but that sort of aircraft. There are scale aircraft. Funnily enough, F-16s are very, very nice flying model jets, but their undercarriage systems are complicated and narrow. So if your flying site always has a crosswind, an F-16 isn't your aeroplane. But as far as its flying characteristic, it's a bit like a Delta. It doesn't really stall, it will mush, or certainly doesn't drop a wing. So there are a lot of aircraft that are suitable from the scale aircraft. Funny enough, aircraft like T-33s aren't always the nicest model. They're fairly high aspect ratio wings, but it will come down to the designer and the wing section. I mean, contact someone in the know and get a list of aircraft that you're interested in. You can contact me and I can say yes, no. Or come to one of the JMA meetings and watch the scale aeroplanes fly. You'll soon know which ones fly nicely.
Looks like Chris Bradbury's getting rather excited about jets at the moment, which is good to hear. You may well have a new pilot on the way. He suggests that you talk a lot about wing loading. Is there a recommended level for beginners of wing loading?
Light as possible. I mean, a lot of people with composite aeroplanes ask what the weight is when we finished aircraft. And generally speaking, I don't weigh my aircraft unless there's a thought that's going to get close to any of the limits, because you're fairly fixed on what it's going to weigh. But no, there's no particular figure that I can come up with. I test flew a scale model, and I think it was 8.5 pounds per square foot of wing loading or something like that. It was very high. But it comes down to the platform. The Deltas generally will cope with a much higher figure. So no, light as possible.
Nathan O'Dwyer. Hi, CFG on a jet. What is the best way to do this? I use the Mark 1 finger on my petrol planes. Do I need scale for jets? It looks like you've answered it.
No, the big heavy models, scales can work, but then you've got to understand a calculator. A lot of jets have plug-in wings, and my favorite trick is a piece of fishing line with a knot on each end, trap it between the wing panels on the CFG and pick it up. And even the biggest, heaviest jets, you can do it like that. There's a lot of electronic scales on the market. I'm not a fan because the load sensors seem to vary. And I've seen and talked to people that have had them where they've checked the CFG every day for a fortnight and they've got a different figure each time. There's a lot of people that use them and like them, but generally speaking, I do like the manual method.
Ray asks, what's your views of converting an EDF foamy as your first turbine?
I'm not a big fan of it, but from the point of view that generally speaking, they'll end up with a heavier wing loading because by the time they're full of fuel, and no jet engine is cheap or low cost, and therefore putting it in something relatively inexpensive to me risks losing the most expensive part of the airframe. So certainly you can do it, but for me, it's not the way I would go.
Thank you. Sorry, these are coming fast and furious. I hope you're all right taking a little breath there every so often. But Adrian Haywood, what sort of servicing costs are seen for the recommended service intervals for the jets, the turbines?
That's a very difficult one to answer again. So on newer turbines, so you get people that rack up the hours very quickly. Generally, the service cost is the bearings. Seeing the majority of jet engines are made out of the UK, then now with Brexit, things have got to be shipped out and back. And again, people don't understand the complication of getting expensive items back in without paying taxes. But I would say from £200. I get people contact me that have bought very low hour but very old turbines, which are then out of warranty, and they think they've got a bit of a bargain. The problem is that generally speaking, the first time they find there's a problem with the turbine is because something's let go, and because of the RPM and the energy in the turbine, it makes a real mess. And then the repair is very, very expensive. So you've got to budget at least a couple of £100 and up.
Great question from Lucas, and one I was expecting, but it's come quite late on. If a jet is to be tested for noise, what's the best way to get better readings? Any tips? Noise seems to be a problem these days.
It's almost impossible to noise test a jet with a dB meter. And I recommend that clubs that have this, and I have been contacted, they use common sense in that they get the guy to fly the aeroplane and they listen. There is a big variation in the noise output of the jets and also the airframe. If it's a bifurcated, a wide twin outlet like an F-15, if they're not designed correctly, they have quite a shrill noise, and that sound, like high-pitched screaming engines, will travel further. But you cannot do a 7-meter, 82 dB type test with a jet. A lot of jet models, if they're fully ducted, if the turbine's completely in a sealed tube inside the fuselage, they'll naturally be quieter than the twin boom aeroplanes where the exhausts are coming straight out the back. So it's very, very difficult. But generally speaking, jets are not a noise nuisance because the noise is low frequency and doesn't travel.
Fabulous. That's great. Chris and Trevor.
Well, that's slightly the wrong way around. It's high frequency and doesn't travel.
Yeah. Well, needs a break. Need a beer.
That's part of the reason you can't use a dB meter, because the frequency is too high and it's outside the range of them.
Chris and Trevor, 2 questions here on fuel. How much fuel does a basic jet use per flight, and what would be sort of the running cost of it? And do you use low fuel warning devices other than the flight timer?
So more and more telemetry is available to tell you. Again, my feeling is a lot of them use the pump RPM, the pump voltage figures as the algorithm, and they're not accurate. So running a turbine, most turbine manufacturers will tell you how many milliliters of fuel they'll burn at full power. It's very rare that you're running a turbine at full power for the whole flight. If you are, it's not the right turbine for the aeroplane. But the small engines, the little sort of 5-6 pounds thrust one, just under a litre of fuel is about right. And like I said, the bigger aeroplanes go up to 6 or 7 litres. Now that the rule is for 25 kilos wet, that's limited. Some of the manufacturers have actually reduced their fuel capacity to get the aircraft under 25 kilos, because in some countries like Germany, it's much more expensive to get the aircraft certified above 25 kilos. It has to go through a proper test. But in the UK, where 25 kilo wet, people are limiting their fuel capacity to 5 litres, and a lot of these aircraft are still under 25 kilos. But they're not very fuel efficient. They're quite expensive because by the time you add turbine oil into it, a 20 litre fuel container, I burnt 2.5 of those over the weekend. The oil alone is £20 per container, plus the kerosene. You can get through some money.
David Bridge, I'm only just starting out in flying in the flying hobby. I already have a Cherokee aircraft as well as a Trojan Warbird that I haven't built yet. However, I'm only just starting my flying training so that I can achieve my test eventually. Initially, I said to someone from my flying club that I wanted to start with the test and then proceed with the B test. How much experience do I need before I can fly a jet turbine? Duncan, I guess that's in your...
Good luck, Duncan.
Go on, Duncan.
Well, I think we've kind of been saying all the way through, it's about a serious amount of learning to manage the energy of the airframe. So until you've got the experience on more conventional airframes, then it's best not to go down the turbine route. So I would say, cut your teeth on standard, fixed wing, normal conventional, either electric or IC powered aircraft. Get yourself where you're flying aircraft of a reasonable size and mass, and you're reasonably competent. And yeah, the B certificate, the fixed wing B certificate, is a good measure of general competence. If you can fly that confidently, then I'm sure you're more than capable of flying a turbine aircraft. But invest time in getting comfortable flying aircraft of a reasonable mass and flying those sort of maneuvers before you contemplate moving into turbines. But as David said, come along to a JMA meeting, see what goes on. You don't need to, have to fly. You don't have to have a B certificate to get involved, and you'll soon get sucked in, and you won't be able to resist it in time. But
he needs to practice in different conditions as well, because going out on the nicest day isn't going to teach you very much. But it's a difficult thing. It's a bit like learning to drive. You get people that will have 3 lessons and pass their test successfully, and people that will have 3 years of lessons and scrape through. And it's a bit like that. And we had a guy a long time ago that joined our local club and was adamant that he wanted to learn to fly on a turbine. And the committee came to me and said, what do we tell him? And I talked to him about money, and he said, I'm not worried about the money. He wasn't super wealthy, but he was comfortable. And it was difficult to come up with an exact argument other than the fact that it probably wasn't safe. And we insisted that he bought a training aircraft, which he turned up with, and on the first day was doing really nice takeoffs, flights and landings. And we were a little bit, okay. And he was actually flying a boomerang jet very soon after that, and very comfortably. And he's still in the hobby now. So it's almost impossible to say.
Thank you. Robert asks, again, it's to do with training or mentoring. So I think that's, I would suggest, rather than reading that one out, get in touch with the JMA, join up, and turn up to one of their sessions. They're always good fun. I've been to 3 of them, and it's fantastic just to watch, even if you don't understand anything about the models. So I've got a couple more about fire. We'll come back to those later because we've done a lot on fire. John Leach, how do you know if a turbine needs a service other than 25 hours?
If it sounds like an underground train coming into a station, the bearings are shot. And it literally does sound like that. But when you first get a turbine, so let's say you buy a brand new turbine, when you shut it down at the end of the run, there's a certain period of time that it will spool down to a very steady, gentle stop. It doesn't tighten up. As the bearings deteriorate, this time will reduce, and you get a gravelness almost, because there's ceramic balls running in steel cages in most of the bearings. So with your ears is one of the biggest indication. If you monitor the pump voltages, which you can do, that will tell you whether fuel pumps wear out quicker than bearings in some cases. More turbine manufacturers are going over to brushless pumps rather than using the old Mabuchi brush motor, because the use of those brush motors has gone down in industry so much the quality of the motors manufactured now are nothing like what they were. And they were designed obviously to run 4 to 6 volts as a normal thing. And most turbines start the pump turning at 0.1 of a volt. And therefore the brush gear has to be very good. So most turbine manufacturers are now trying to move across to brushless pumps, which should be lifeless almost. But with your ears, if it sounds a bit rough, it probably needs a service.
David Wood's question here: as most jets weigh more than 7.5 kgs, it is difficult to keep below the 120 metre height limit. And when do you think the equivalent of NOTAMs will begin being issued again?
So the Elvington Club had an API and a NOTAM for Elvington for the weekend. We had clearance to fly to 1,500 feet. They're just starting to come online now as the BMFA, and maybe Andy could talk about this.
I've got a better idea. We can bring Dave in if he's still there.
Yeah,
Are you still online, Dave? Here he is.
Is he awake?
Well, he's there. His camera might be. He'll be answering emails, knowing Dave.
Oh, just before he comes on for that, before he comes on there, there's a couple about
Here he is.
fire again. Oh no, we've got Dave back. Let's go for Dave. Go on, Dave.
Yeah.
Did you hear that question?
Yeah. So what we're doing isn't a substitute for NOTAMs. It's a substitute for the exemptions that used to be issued to permit you to operate aircraft over 7 kilos above 400 foot. So that's the bit that we've taken over from the CAA. So we've already started issuing permits for displays and for flying sites. We've issued the first few. We have got rather a lot though in the system that we're trying to wade out through this week. But once we issue the permit, then you would still need a NOTAM or the site permanently listed in the AIP. So we are on with it. Hopefully it will work better than what we had before with the CAA. But it's a bit of a learning curve for all of us at the moment.
Thank you,
I
Dave.
think the CAA stopped issuing them, didn't they, before they got everything in place for us to do them?
The CAA carried out a strategic review of model flying around Christmas time and decided as part of that they were no longer going to issue any exemptions to model flying, and that they all had to be handled through the model flying associations. Our suggestion was that they left it until 2022 to give us time to put procedures and policies in place, but they were adamant that they were going to stop with immediate effect. So it left quite a few clubs in the lurch. I suppose the fortunate thing was that it was during lockdown, so it gave us a little bit of time before flying activities really started taking off again.
Dave, thank you very much indeed. Nathan asks, do you have any trade stands at your meets, Dave?
No.
No.
No, I mean, it doesn't stop. We get people ring the various traders that visit the events and request stuff to be brought along to be collected. But as far as trade stands, no.
Lewis puts a statement in here. Paul Heckle's Jet Experience Days need to make a return, Dave, ? There is a lot of interest from beginners, it seems.
There is. We would need to talk to the BMFA about that because Paul's had various issues, but we can look at it. I mean, the JMA a long time ago, we did Jet Experience Days and we charged £25 to allow individuals to have a fly of members' models, mainly mine. And it didn't go the way I'd envisaged it to go. I hoped that people would come along with the view of seriously being interested in starting in jets. And what we found was people that had absolutely no interest in flying a jet long term, but decided that for 25 quid, they would go of a £6,500 jet, including a lady who turned up who'd only ever flown slope soarers with her feet. So she put my 12X on the runway at Long Marsden Airfield and took her shoes and socks off. And I thought it was funny, but she could fly with her feet. But so it's a difficult one to administer. And yes, we'll see.
I'm lost there. I'm lost. Ian Goddard, why don't we have any option to service turbines in the UK rather than shipping them back to the manufacturer?
Many reasons, but equipment is the main thing. The turbine brand that I represent, they have the most sophisticated machines you've ever seen that are hundreds of thousands of pounds for balancing. They do things differently than just about every other turbine manufacturer on the market. And you just couldn't justify the cost of getting that machinery for the number of turbines. So most of the turbines that are represented by the various different companies in the UK can do what I call exterior work, changing starter motors, changing ECUs and bits and pieces. But if the engine needs full servicing for bearings and taking apart, really, I would recommend sending it back to where it was made.
Last 5 questions here, I think. Now, well, looks like 6. We'll start to wind these up because we'll be here all night, and we'll just have to get you back again for another session, I think. But Trevor asked, what size range of turbines to start in the hobby? I guess that depends on the plane itself, the model itself. But
yes, but the very popular size, I mean, we're talking newtons. 100 newtons is a very popular. So I would say probably between 80 and 120 newtons are the most popular. The cost of the smaller turbines has come down because actually smaller turbines are more complicated and timely, take longer to balance and finely tune. But there's a range of turbines starting at 60, 70 newtons. But really and truly, I always sort of recommend that people buy something between 80 and 120 newtons because there's a lot of airframes that will suit that size of thrust.
Brilliant, thank you. Neville Haycox, what actions should I take to run a turbine and pump that hasn't run for a couple of years?
So if it's a pump that's exterior to the turbine, you should be able to run the pump on the ECU on its own. I've seen pumps like that are seized, and actually putting your fuel houser or some fuel pressure on one nipple on the pump and forcing fuel through the gears, because there's 2 gears running together in a little receptacle. You can free up pumps before you actually put electricity on them because the brushed motors don't like being stalled. But I'd run the pump first to check that the pump is flowing and there's no debris or particles that are built up in that little area, and then connect it straight up to the turbine. And again, after the lockdown, I recommended to a lot of my friends that they started their turbine and allowed it to idle. It's not like an internal combustion engine where it can clog up. Let it idle for a length of time to get some oil back into the bearings before you add maximum heat, because the faster the turbine runs, the hotter it gets. Right,
2 on fire and then 2 on membership, and I think we'll call it a day on that. So Eugene asks, with carrying a CO2 fire extinguisher, do you again need to have a sticker on your car, notify your insurance company, and have the extinguisher serviced yearly? And then Greg asks, which is similar again, when do fires usually occur? Is it mainly startup?
So Greg's first. So yes, generally startup would be the normal time, because once the turbine is established and running, it would have to start to nip up. And what would happen then is the fuel pump would try and pump more fuel in to make it go faster before it realizes that it's losing. And normally by then it seizes solid and it catches fire. But as I said, these days fires are very, very rare. At the 2-3 days of Elvington, I don't know how many 100 flights there were, but I didn't hear a fire extinguisher. You got a very distinctive sound when people fire a CO2 fire extinguisher. I didn't hear one being used all weekend. As far as carrying it around, I'm not aware of any insurance implication to carry them, because cars carry CO2 fire extinguishers. And in fact, on the continent, I believe they insist in some of the countries. But it is something to think about, because a 2 kilo fire extinguisher, you do not want that loose in your car. Not just because it will destroy your aeroplane, but in the event of an accident, it will decapitate you. So underneath the seat is a good way, certainly on the floor. It needs common sense, but yes, I mean, I would tuck it underneath the seat. But no, I don't think you need to inform your insurance company, but you should check with them.
Brilliant. Thank you. Right. Going back to your answer on paying £25 for flying a jet, would you do this for new members to the JMA and maybe put the cost up by another £10, making it a little bit more expensive to cut out one-offs that have no interest?
The problem is the JMA don't own any jets. We did try a long time ago. We had a very generous member that donated 2 jets. We did a deal with Wren on some turbines, and McGregor Industries supplied some radio. It didn't really work as far as people always having it at the flying site at the field. It's a very difficult one. As was said by a guy called Lewis, Paul Heckles used to offer jet experience days. They haven't happened for a long time. Maybe it could be looked at, but really and truly, going to a club or being in a club where they're operated or coming to our events would give you a better indication as to whether you want to invest that much money in the hobby.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dave. That's the last question for you. And one for Duncan here, I think, from Mike. Can I now submit my joining application? Question mark, maybe.
Yeah. If you're not currently a member, then yes, please. Fill in the app. If you're already a member, i.e., you were a member in 2019, or you joined in 2020 or 2021, then don't do anything. But if you're a genuine new member, then yes, please fill in your application form. You can do it all online. I will get an automatic email and I'll send your membership card off to you. But bear in mind that we're hopefully having our AGM on the 12th, and we'll be setting the fees going forward. Important thing about the fees is the JMA is pretty much a pay-as-you-fly organisation. So the membership fee itself is a relatively small nominal amount, but of course you have to pay to come to each of the meetings. So the idea being is that those people that fly a lot pay more than those people that don't, but you can all be members.
Yeah, so for history, the membership fee has been £25 a year to be a member of the association, flying or not. And then generally speaking, £15 per day. So some guys, because of family responsibility, they only come one day, so they just pay £15 rather than 30 for the weekend. So yeah, the £25 covers the between 9 and 11 meetings we run. And then, as Duncan says, you pay to fly on top of that.
Fantastic. Nathan's just saying thank you both for everything, and so's Greg. Super job on that. Chat wise, there's lots and lots of thanks. Everybody's enjoying it. There's no abuse in there, which is rather good to see. And I shouldn't have invited that on. We probably best stop the recording now before we start getting it.
Yeah, commentator's curse.
Yeah.
Neil Tricker put his hand up, so I'm assuming he wants to
Neil.
ask a question. Yeah. So, Neil, if you want to unmute yourself, ask away.
Just remember, you're wrapping up the show by doing this.
What we will do at this point, we should say thank you to everybody who joined us on YouTube, and see you next time round.
And we'll let you know what it is in